The room I remember most clearly is not the room where it happened. It is the room before it. A small bedroom in my parents' house in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Late October. The window glass cold to the touch. My wedding dress hanging from a nail on the door. Plain, dark blue, the way old order requires. Because in an Amish home, there is no closet, there is no ceremony of unveiling. There is only the dress on the nail and the morning coming faster than you want it to. I am 19 years old. My mother is somewhere downstairs. I can hear the other women moving, dishes, low voices, the particular sound a house makes when it is full of people who have come to witness something they will never speak of directly. And I am standing in front of a small square mirror, the only mirror in the house, kept in this room for practical purposes only. And I am doing what my husband-to-be has already done twice. I am inspecting myself. Before I tell you what that means, let me introduce myself. My name is Martha. I grew up Old Order Amish in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and I left when I was 26 years old. This channel, Hannah the Amish Girl, is where I finally say the things my community would never allow me to say out loud. If you want to hear more hidden truths from behind the prayer cap, subscribe right now and tap the like button. And tell me in the comments, did you know this practice existed? Because most people outside our world have never heard of it, and most people inside it never speak of it. Now let me explain what I mean when I say he inspected me. And I mean that word precisely. In the Old Order Amish community where I was raised, marriage is not a private agreement between two people who have chosen each other freely. It is a covenant made between families, blessed by the church, governed by the Ordnung, the unwritten but absolute code of rules that shapes every element of daily life. Who you may marry, when, how, under what conditions. The Ordnung does not write these things down. That is the point. They live in the understanding of the community, passed from generation to generation, not through documents, but through watching and correcting and knowing. And one of the things that is known, that has always been known, though rarely spoken of above a whisper, is that a man considering marriage to a woman is permitted in certain districts of our community to conduct what the older women called a suitability inspection. It does not have an official name. It is not announced. It does not appear anywhere in the church teachings as a formal practice. But it exists the way many things in Amish life exist. Everyone knows, no one says. When my mother told me it would happen, she did not explain it as unusual. She explained it the way she explained everything difficult, briefly, practically, with the tone she used when telling me how to slaughter a chicken. This is how things are done, Martha. It is not for us to question the way things have always been done. I was 18 when she told me. Joseph and I had been in courtship for 4 months. He was 22. He ran a small carpentry shop on his family's land, and he had a reputation in our district for being steady, hard-working, fair-minded. The kind of man a father pointed to when talking to his daughter about what a good husband looked like. He had asked my father's permission to proceed toward marriage. My father had said yes. And then my mother told me what came next. A man considering marriage, she explained, in our district, and in many of the more conservative Old Order communities nearby, was given 1 or sometimes 2 opportunities to inspect his intended bride. The purpose, as the community understood it, was to confirm suitability for the work of marriage and family. That she was healthy. That she was physically capable of bearing children and managing a household. That there were no hidden conditions the bride's family might have concealed in order to secure the match. I asked my mother if Joseph would be in the room. She said yes. I asked if I would be alone with him. She said no, she would be present. And one of the older women from the church, a woman who served in an unofficial role in our district as a kind of midwife and advisor, though she was never formally named as such, she would be there as well. I asked what he would be looking for. My mother's expression changed in a way I did not have words for at the time. I have words for it now. It was the expression of a woman who has accepted something she was never given permission to question, and who feels, in the moment of being asked to pass it on, the weight of what she is carrying. She said, "He will look to see that you are well." That is all she said. The first inspection happened on a Thursday evening, 3 weeks before the wedding date had been set. I was brought into the sitting room of my parents' house at a time when my father and brothers had been sent to tend the animals. The older woman, I will call her Rebecca, because that is not her name, sat near the window with her hands folded in her lap as though she were waiting for a church service to begin. Joseph came in. He did not look at me the way a man looks at a woman he is courting. He looked at me the way a man looks at a piece of land he is considering purchasing, assessing, measuring. His eyes moved without embarrassment because in his understanding, in the understanding his community had given him, this was not something to be embarrassed about. This was a practical necessity, a responsible step. Rebecca spoke. She told me to stand straight. She told me to turn. She asked me to extend my hands, palms up, so that Joseph could see them. She asked him if he had questions. He asked about my health, whether I had been sick in recent years, whether there was any weakness in my lungs that ran in the family. My mother answered most of the questions on my behalf. I stood there. I want to be careful here about how I describe what happened next because I have had years now to process it, in therapy and outside of it, and I understand it differently at different distances. At the time, I was not angry. I was not even frightened, not exactly. I had been prepared for this. I had been told what was coming and I had been told it was normal, which in my community it was. And there is something that happens to a person when they are told something difficult is normal, especially from the time they are very young. You do not experience the thing as wrong. You experience it as the way the world is. The feeling underneath it, the one with no name, that comes later. What I felt in that room, standing with my palms up while Joseph looked at my hands, was something I would not be able to identify for another 8 years. I felt like something being evaluated rather than someone being known. Rebecca guided the inspection with the efficiency of a woman who had done this many times. She did not seem uncomfortable. She spoke to Joseph with a practical authority, explaining what she observed, offering her assessment of my health and constitution in the same tone my mother used when discussing livestock. Capable, strong frame, good teeth, good eyes. She will carry children well. Those were not her exact words. But they were close. Joseph nodded. He thanked my father, who had come back inside by then. He did not thank me. He left. The older women gathered briefly in the kitchen. I heard them speaking in Pennsylvania Dutch, low and efficient. I could not make out the words. I stood in the sitting room for a moment alone, and I looked at my hands, the ones I had held out for him. And then I went upstairs, and I made the bed that did not need to be made, just to have something to do with those hands. The second inspection happened a week later. My mother told me the night before. She said Joseph had a few additional questions. She said Rebecca would be present again. She said it would be shorter. She was right. It was shorter. It was also more specific. I will not describe in full what the second inspection involved, because this platform has its limits, and I have learned exactly where they are. What I will tell you is this. After it was over, Rebecca said to my mother, in a tone I was not meant to overhear but did because I was standing 3 feet away, "She will do well." Those 4 words, "She will do well," as though I were a field that had been determined to be fertile. There is a part of this story I cannot tell you here. Not on this platform. Not under these rules. The algorithm has limits, and I have learned exactly where they are. So I wrote the rest down instead. Slowly, without the softening, without the cuts. Everything the camera is not permitted to show. The book is called The Ordnung They Never Wrote Down. 208 pages of what plain life looks like from the inside of it. The link is in the first comment of this video. That is where the part I could not say out loud lives. After I left the Amish world at 26, I found a therapist. an Englishwoman who had worked for years with people leaving high-control religious communities. She had heard many things in that office. She did not react with shock easily. When I described the inspections to her, both of them, in the full detail I cannot give you here, she was quiet for a moment. Then she asked me a question that I have thought about nearly every day since. She asked, "Did anyone, at any point during either of those inspections, ask you how you felt?" I had to think about it. I thought about my mother's face when she told me it was coming. I thought about Rebecca's calm efficiency. I thought about Joseph's assessing eyes. I thought about my father shaking Joseph's hand afterward in the kitchen. I thought about the sound of the women talking behind the door. "No," I said, "no one asked." My therapist said, "That is not incidental to the practice. That is the practice." She meant that the absence of my feelings was not an oversight. It was not that everyone forgot to ask. It was that my experience of the inspections was not considered relevant information. What mattered was Joseph's assessment, Rebecca's verification, and the family's satisfaction. My body was the subject being examined. But my interior life, what I felt, what I feared, what I needed, that was not part of the evaluation. It never had been. I want to tell you about a woman I will call Anna. Anna was from a neighboring district, slightly more conservative than my own. We met years later, after we had both left, at a small gathering of women with similar backgrounds. We had never met before, but we recognized each other in the way that people recognize each other when they have survived the same thing. Anna had been inspected 3 times before her wedding. 3. Her intended husband's family had requested a 3rd examination because there had been, in their words, a concern raised after the 2nd one. Anna never found out what the concern was. She was simply told to present herself again. And she did. And afterward the concern was apparently resolved, and the wedding proceeded on schedule. She told me this the way she told me many things that evening, matter-of-factly, with a steadiness that I recognized as the particular composure of a woman who has done a great deal of work to be able to speak about certain things without falling apart. She was not falling apart, but her hands were very still in her lap, in the way that hands are still when a person is holding themselves together very carefully. I said, "How old were you?" She said, 17 for the first 2, 18 for the 3rd. We sat with that for a moment. The practice I am describing is not universal across all Amish communities. I want to be clear about this because the Amish world is not one thing. There are hundreds of distinct affiliations: Old Order, New Order, Swartzentruber, Andy Weaver, Beachy Amish, each with its own ordnung, its own interpretations, its own level of conservatism or openness. In the more progressive communities, practices like the one I have described have faded or disappeared entirely. In the Beachy Amish communities, which are considerably more open, marriage preparation looks almost unrecognizable compared to what I experienced. But in the more conservative Old Order and Swartzentruber districts, and there are many of these, spread across Ohio and Pennsylvania and Indiana, the inspection practice, or versions of it, persist. Not because anyone stands up in church and defends it, but because the Ordnung does not need to be defended. It only needs to be maintained. And it is maintained the same way everything in that world is maintained. Through silence. Through the assumption that what has always been done is what should continue to be done. Through the passing of difficult information from mother to daughter in brief, practical tones that leave no room for the daughter to say, "But why? I married Joseph." The wedding was on a Tuesday in November, 300 people, 4 hours of preaching. The bishop spoke about yielding, about the wife who submits to her husband as the church submits to God. I stood there in my dark blue dress, and I listened, and I thought about my palms held out in the sitting room, and Rebecca's voice saying she will do well. I thought, I have already been submitted. Before the vows, before any of this. The submission did not begin here. Our marriage lasted 6 years. I will not say it was without love. Joseph was not a cruel man. He did not understand, I think, that anything about those inspections had been wrong. He had been raised to understand them as a responsible man's due diligence, a protection for both families, a practical necessity. The framework he had been given told him that what he had done was careful and respectful. His community had handed him that framework as surely as mine had handed me my silence. That is the thing I have sat with longest. Not anger at him specifically, though there was that in the early years after I left, but something larger and colder. Anger at a system that handed a 22-year-old man permission he did not know he should have questioned, and handed a 19-year-old woman a silence she did not know she was allowed to break. When I left, the shunning came quickly. Letters returned. The phone that rang with no answer on the other end. My mother once, staying on the line long enough to say, "I will pray for you, Martha." And then the click. I have played that click over many times in the years since. I have tried to hear in it something other than what it was. I have not succeeded. In therapy, I was given words I had never been permitted to use before. Bodily autonomy, consent. The difference between yielding and being taken from. I learned that understanding what happened to you, naming it, does not make you disloyal, it makes you honest. And honest is something the community I came from valued in every area of life, with the single exception of anything that might disturb the order. There is a woman I think about often. I do not know her name. I saw her once at a mud sale, a fundraising auction, when I was 17, before my own inspections, before I knew what was coming. She was standing apart from the other women, a little distance from the auction tables, watching the crowd. She was young, she was dressed plainly, like all of us. But there was something in her expression that I did not have the vocabulary for at 17. I have the vocabulary now. She looked like someone who had recently learned that the world was built in a way she had not been told about. I know that look from the inside. If you grew up in a community where your body was evaluated before anyone thought to ask how you felt, I see you. If you were handed a silence and told it was modesty, I see you. If you stood in a room with your palms out and you smiled because you had been raised to understand that this was simply the way things were, and some part of you, small and quiet, knew that something was wrong but you had no language for it and no permission to speak it, I see you. You were not wrong. You were never wrong. You were simply given a framework too small to hold you. And the mistake was the framework, not you. If you want to read the version of this story that YouTube will not allow, the full pages are in The Ordnung They Never Wrote Down. First comment of this video. And that is everything. Choose your freedoms wisely. They might just save your life.